Hello there, and welcome to the virtual Vechtschule. If you are here just for the sparring, feel free to skip ahead. Otherwise, try to imagine this scene. A warm late summer day in the Hanseatic city of Hamburg. From the countryside, peasants and their families flock to the city to sell or buy at the market. The atmosphere is festive, heady even. At the city gates, guards make sure that nobody brings any forbidden weapons into the city, but the long knives carried by many are perfectly legal. Of course, where so many people gather, some disorder will inevitably follow, especially in an honor culture as it existed in Europe during the late Middle Ages and early modern period. Seeing peasants fight with their simple long knives, often called rugger or Bauernwehr by modern scholars, was a common enough experience that it became something of a trope for early 16th century artists. The closest equivalent would be machete street fights with seemingly similar levels of intent and involvement of bystanders. In a modern HEMA context, most people rather just fence with weapons, and often somewhat longer ones for fun, rather than seeing it as a perfect simulation of a medieval street fight. It's after all a completely different context with different rules, and also a completely different approach to risk versus reward. Wearing a mask and fighting for points changes things significantly from real-life street fight scenarios. Occasionally making a small excursion into this context can be both fun and educational though. That's why both Ulrik from the Vrije Vechter and MesserMinute and me got ourselves not only regular messers but also some shorter ruggers and Bauernwehr. So when we met up in Hamburg, we decided to play around with these a bit and record the bout. When going through the footage, an idea struck me. Let's just analyze the exchanges, both as if this was an actual fight between two peasants around the year 1500, as well as according to modern HEMA rules. Ulrik and I were obviously not specifically aiming to fight in a way that was optimized for either context, but this is a fun opportunity to try and compare both of them. This does mean that we should probably first agree on some criteria for this though. As a YouTube video happens to be a bit of a monologue, that agreement was quickly reached. I did try to go with simple criteria though, choosing rather action-based descriptions for the fencing analysis rather than following any given rule set. There's a lot of different ones out there that award points differently. And I'd just like to describe what's happening so you can take your favorite rule set and make up your mind who gets the most points and to what extent that scoring is related to a historical context. For the historical analysis, just like in previous videos, I'll again be making some judgment calls about what I think the effect of a hit may have been. These are certainly up for discussion, but you need to draw a line somewhere to make some sense of what we're seeing. Around the year 1500, the authorities, like now, weren't all that fond of people attacking each other with weapons. With a deep-rooted honor culture on one hand though, and a much weaker state that didn't have the modern monopoly on violence, people had a bit more leeway. Peasants did not enjoy an awful lot of legal protection, but they generally knew their rights, and if charged with killing or maiming their opponent in a street fight, they may find that manslaughter was considered excusable, just so long as they could demonstrate it was not intentional murder. This would help explain the great number of non-lethal techniques in fight books, such as disarms and light thrusts that would mostly lead to bleeding wounds. As such, I basically decided to divide hits into three categories. Minor injuries, so bruises, small nicks and cuts, fight-ending injuries, and finally fight-ending injuries with serious legal consequences. The latter category would involve hits that would be deemed too forceful, especially thrusts to the throat and body that are too committed, potentially getting the survivor of the fight banished from the city or much, much worse. Since this was just a standard round of sparring as far as Ulrik and I are concerned, this would be an interesting opportunity to see to what extent our fencing actually fits this historical context, and what relationship exists between such historical contexts and the way that HEMA approaches fencing with weapons nowadays. So, without further ado, let's go have a look at the sparring. Nice. Yeah, I go well.
Did you get me here?
Not much.
a bit more with the letters? Yeah. Yes. ¿Puedes ir o no? Yes, it is.
So, time for some conclusions. After editing everything, I must say that it was much less of a murder fest than I expected originally. Since we were not particularly looking to avoid the attention of the authorities, I would have expected a lot more exchanges to have ended with serious injuries that would have had legal consequences. There were a few very obvious ones, of course, but the majority of the bout was pretty clean and very controlled, despite me nursing a bad knee at the time and the resulting crappy footwork. Of course, one could counter that, especially in competitive environments, the number of really deep thrusts and committed hard blows would have been much higher. But it's not like we were being particularly slow or cooperative here, and yet we managed to keep it quite controlled. Interestingly, with only a few exceptions, the murder exchanges were escalations of an exchange where a lot of acceptable hits had already been given, or in a prolonged grapple. We see very similar accounts of messy fights show up in court records, although it might be a bit much to make anything more of that correlation just yet. It's interesting to put it out there though. Finally, it's very interesting to have a look at how modern HEMA rule sets would value these exchanges. Some rule sets would score the touches, while others wouldn't. Some have weighted scoring, others don't. Some score the afterblow in doubles, and others have them just negate a score. Most would award full points for the murder exchanges, which does give you something to think about. When you want a rule set to simulate a real fight, you're not only going to have to take injuries into account, but also the moral and legal dimensions around violence. And both of those can be pretty tough. If you'd ask me, most rule sets within HEMA are gamified, and that is just fine. Simulating a historical context accurately is hard, and instead, making a rule set safe and accessible will probably have more benefits to it. As long as you're very clear about what you're doing and why. So, if you think all that was interesting, it would be very much appreciated if you did any or all of the regular YouTube stuff like commenting and sharing. And of course, check out the work that Ulrik does. His content on Messer is fun and useful. Now, as YouTubers keep annoyingly repeating this stuff on every video, but the very unfortunate reason is that I'm occupying only a tiny niche of an already niche hobby. If it doesn't involve armor, great swords, or any of the other stuff that seems to attract the well-actually crowd, the algorithm doesn't care much about what I do. So any sort of small support goes a long way, and it helps me keep up the work I do to create interesting and well-researched historical fencing content. If you really want to support my work, you are of course most welcome to check out Patreon. I'm currently preparing a lot of Messer content, including some interesting Patreon exclusives such as complete lessons. If you're interested in that, be sure to have a look. That said, I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you all for the next one. Okay, doei!